Start recording. Howdy everyone, my name is Lei. I am the CVA, the Community Volunteer Ambassador for the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So, as a visible disclosure, we'd like to inform any participants that any and all Zoom series is and will be recorded. The purpose of this is to provide the Zoom series to those who participated or missed out on the session. It is also provided information for participants to refer back to. In addition to the visible disclosure, this statement will be orally stated at the beginning of each Zoom series, as I am right now, and I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off to our speaker today, Julieanne.
Hello guys, I'm gonna share my screen to get the presentation up. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Looking good. Let me make sure I can. Weird, I can't advance it. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, it looks like everything's working. All right, well, thank you for inviting me today. My name, as Lei said, is Julieanne. I'm one of the park rangers at National Monument in the interpretation division. So I do really a little bit of everything. As a small park, we only have maybe less than 20 employees. And so we all help each other out a lot with interdivision. And very, very importantly, we have a big volunteer program here as well. And we definitely could not run this park without our volunteers. On a given day, if someone comes to visit the park, you might see only volunteers, even at the entrance booth, at the visitor center when it was open, and then roving around the park in our tide pool area. So our volunteers for our program are definitely really, really essential. I think a few have joined us as well today. So thanks for tuning in. All right, so I'm gonna get started and give you a little background history of how Cabrillo came to be formed as a park, and then talk a little bit about our different themes and the different things that we interpret. And as we go along, I'd love to hear your questions. So I think we're gonna do it through the chat box. Oops. Yeah, I guess, let's see, reshare that. I might not be able to see the chat box then, so let's see if Lei or Sarah will let me know if there's any questions.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah and I could double check the chat box.
Okay. And I'll pause at a few different places so we can get the questions in. Before we get started though, well, I guess let's get started into the presentation as we go. Let me know where you have questions, because I especially want to gear the presentation towards what's interesting to all of you, and especially as national park volunteers yourselves, you'll have a little bit more background. Has anyone been to Cabrillo? Can we do like a hand raise? Can you do that on Zoom? I can see. Oh yeah, I can see, yeah. Who's raising their hand? Yeah, the virtual hand and the real hands. Looks good, cool, cool. Yeah, so a few folks have been down. Yeah, for myself, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from New Jersey, and so I've only been out here about, I guess, a year and a half now. So I've been up to Santa Monica Mountains, but it's been a while. So sometime I'll have to come up there and get the introduction on your park as well. Okay, so let's see. All right, so just to get into a little bit of background on Cabrillo National Monument before it was part of the Park Service. So this piece of land, it's on the end of a peninsula, and when this became part of the United States after the Mexican-American War, pretty much immediately, the president designated this whole peninsula as federal land for military use. So really still the same that you see when you come here today. If you took a drive down Point Loma, before you come to us, you come to a little stop entrance booth where you drive through, and then you're in all the Navy land. And also the military cemetery as well, views over the bay and over the ocean from both sides. So this has been military land then since 1850, and a little while later on that there became to be some interest in making this a designated national monument. And that was in 1913. And so at that time, Cabrillo National Monument was established by presidential proclamation, October 14, 1913. And the basis of that, the reason, our founding principle is that back in 1542, the Spanish explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo landed here, and he was actually here just for 6 days. So he's here 6 days, gets a whole national monument named after him, and he continues sailing up the coast and continues with his exploration. And I'll get into more of Cabrillo's story when we get further in the presentation. But one thing that I think is really interesting, the reason in 1913 that anyone's caring about this guy named Cabrillo is because at that time there were a lot of settlers here of Portuguese descent. So a lot of Portuguese fishermen were moving to Point Loma, and Cabrillo sailed for Spain. He was thought to be Portuguese, and so they adopted him as a guy that's from their culture, versus around here we mostly have Spanish and Mexican history. And so the Portuguese community, like, okay, we're gonna have Cabrillo, he's our guy, and we want this monument to dedicate to him. So that's a lot of the reason that we ended up having this place protected at all. And as I go on throughout the presentation, you'll see there's a lot more now that we do, a lot more stories that we do tell. Before I move on, were there any questions?
Somebody asked how close it is to Camp Pendleton.
Well, it's in Oceanside. Let's see, like.
I'd say about 60 miles.
60 miles, yeah, thanks, Sandy. Yeah, it's a little bit of a drive. The chief of Interp here lives pretty much there. She's got like a, I don't know, almost hour and a half, maybe hour and 15-minute drive up there. Yeah, but not too far away. And here we've got a little bit of background and some historic photos of Cabrillo, again, before it was a national park. And here you can see it was a really popular day use spot that folks would drive out. They could drive, now you can't do this, but back then you could all drive right up to the lighthouse and walk around wherever you want. You see all the little people, you can see the picture, they're all walking around. And then this is something I'm sure you're all familiar. You see going through the brush, you see all the little coastal trails. Or excuse me, social trails. Yeah, where people just go, but they're not really supposed to. Yeah, so that was, back then there was no program in place to restore the native vegetation or anything. So a lot of that, the coastal sage scrub, native vegetation kind of all got wiped out or overrun with military use, and then just with people coming and doing their little off trail, like you can see on the picture. Back then in 1913, the land was all managed by the Army officially. And that was until 1933 that then the Park Service took over. And here, I love this picture. You can see a little bit of the day tripper back in the day, early 1900s. They come out for the day to spend some time by the lighthouse. You can see though, if you look closely at this picture, you see those, so it's the lighthouse behind them to the right, and just behind them on the left, you see the wooden planks, and you see how there's like boards missing and everything. So people actually would come up once the lighthouse was abandoned. I'll get into that whole story in a bit. They'd actually take pieces of it with them. I was reading an oral history of a woman who used to live nearby on the base, and she'd walk with her baby in the baby stroller down there in 1915 or so. And she said, oh yeah, like the lighthouse, there was nothing left. People took like the doors, like the floorboards, like everything that they could walk away with. So when it was time for when the park took over, it was a big project to restore everything. And here, this is what, once the Park Service did restore the park, they restored the lighthouse. And this was one of the postcards you could buy. Back then, you'd walk into the lighthouse and there was a little tea room and then a little gift shop. And so you could buy things like this. You see the name on there, it's called the Old Spanish Lighthouse. It's like the old, the only thing I can think of is when they built this lighthouse, they actually took materials from other places too. So from an old Spanish fort. So maybe that's where it got its name. One of the lighthouse keeper's wives was of California, so like Mexican Spanish descent. So maybe that's where it's got its name. But otherwise, it's definitely an American lighthouse. But it just got that kind of nickname back in the day. All right. So any questions here before we move on? No?
No.
Good to go? Okay. All right, so here's just a little background, what we're gonna go through in more detail, a little bit of the older history of the park, of the Kumeyaay, Cabrillo's Voyage. Then we'll talk also about the coastal sage scrub, wildlife, the old Point Loma Lighthouse, military history, the tide pools or the rocky intertidal zone, and then the gray whale migration. So all these points listed here, these are part of our themes. So these are things that we have different ways for folks who come to visit to learn about this, either for programs, volunteers. I mean, now, of course, we can't have live programs. So we have a lot of exhibits and waysides around the park that teach about these topics. Here we're going to get into a little bit of background for those who haven't been down here to visit yet. So you see on the left there the map of San Diego, and then if you see, can you see my mouse? I don't know. Can you see my mouse or no?
Yeah.
You can. Okay, yeah. So if you come down this peninsula, so pretty much the whole end of this peninsula is all that Navy land like I was talking about. And then at the end, you see the little green outline there. That's where Cabrillo is. That's our official designation. It started out actually back in 1913 when it was designated. It was just a little tiny plot of land, like an acre around the lighthouse. And then slowly that has expanded to help preserve the coastal sage scrub, the tide pools, different areas that are added in. And if you see at the end how there's a piece of the peninsula that's not part of our park, I'll get into that a little bit too, but there's a Coast Guard lighthouse station that's still operating and then some Navy land as well. So with all of our, all the projects having to do with the natural resources, we collaborate heavily with the Navy as well, because our borders, you know, we have borders for us, but for the animals, they're going back and forth between all those areas. So here on the right is the zoomed in area, and you can see our map of what we've got. We've got our visitor center, the Cabrillo statue that folks usually visit first. Usually that's the beginning of their visit. They'll head up to the lighthouse area. Maybe they'll walk the Bayside Trail, which brings them all the way down close to the water, but not quite at the water. Up top, the lighthouse, the whale watch overlook, and then we have a military radio room that they can visit, and a bunker that's open certain days. And of course, during the COVID now, all the indoor spaces are closed. So we haven't been able to open that for a little while. And then our last resource that is very popular to visit is down by the tide pools. And down below, folks go down their park, they can wade in, see the tide pools, walk along a trail down there as well. Do we have one more question come in?
Yes. Somebody wants to, question is, how long is the trail inside the park? So
yeah, the Bayside.
Probably the Bayside, yeah.
Yeah, the Bayside Trail is about 2 miles total. It's an out and back. The original plan for that trail was to go through, keep it going further, but then we hit the Navy land, and so it was never expanded. Then the other one, there's one by the tide pools. It's about half a mile. It's out and back as well. All right. When you get to Cabrillo, the first thing you do, you come up to the little entrance booth. It's pretty narrow in that spot of our park. We only have one lane, so you can imagine, like right now, since it's a Sunday afternoon, I'm sure there's a line out there to get into the park. So you get to Cabrillo. When you first drive in, we've got the nice welcome sign where folks like to take photos, come around and park, and then usually the visitor center is open. Of course, now we have a little stand just sort of in front of it. And in there we have the park rangers, and then also the Cabrillo National Monument Foundation. They run our bookstore. And so they have a few employees there as well. And we both use that interior space. Are there more questions? I saw a notification.
Somebody said that, Mary says that she misses volunteering at the visitor center.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I miss being in there too. Okay, so that's a little orientation of coming into Cabrillo. And now moving more into our different themes. We go way back in time, back to the early history of this area. We have the Kumeyaay Native Americans, that there are multiple bands of Kumeyaay that would have come through this area, and would have been especially to use as fishing grounds. So they would have come like in the tide pool sort of area, used it as their fishing ground, and then headed back out. So not really a place where people would have been settled for a long time, but more of using it for the natural resources. And nowadays we have some, we have Kumeyaay tribes that are on both sides of the border. So there's some, now they're more inland where their reservations are. There's multiple Kumeyaay tribes there, and then some in Baja California as well. And that's a part of the history that for Cabrillo National Monument, really important to us, and we tell some of the history, but to really get the full Kumeyaay history, you have to go and visit some of the Kumeyaay museums, since it's their story to tell and their history, they have control over that. But we do work in partnership. We have sometimes we have a school program that we do for kids, and we have some Kumeyaay leaders that will also help to advise us to make sure that we're on the same page. And that photo there, you're seeing on the right, that's of the tide pool area from up above, so you can see the whole expanse. So in 1542, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo shows up here, and of course he's not the first person there at all, because the Kumeyaay had been there for thousands of years, and one tribe of Kumeyaay was actually in this area of Point Loma when Cabrillo lands. So that would be what first cultural exchange for the Kumeyaay and for the Spanish explorers on board, the first time that they're aware of each other and aware of each other's cultures. So for Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, his story starts back in Spain. This is another very interesting point, that for a long time we thought that he was Portuguese based on a historian's report from the 1600s. He's writing down his whole report. He writes Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, Portuguese, continues on with his account. So for, I don't know, the next few hundred years, people thought that he was Portuguese, until very, very recently in 2014, a historian by the name of Wendy Kramer was doing some research and found primary source documents where he's asked his name, he's asked where he's born, and he's born in a small town in Spain, actually, near Seville. And so Cabrillo, for a long time, I'll get to it a little bit in a little bit, but he still is celebrated by the Portuguese community, because for all those years they thought that he was Portuguese. So Cabrillo's story starts then in Spain when he's a very young man. He's only about 15 or so when he leaves home, goes to the New World. He's with Hernan Cortez when he conquers Guatemala and takes over that area for the Spanish. And so through that, Cabrillo becomes very wealthy. He becomes a landowner in the Spanish system. And so with that, he then starts to take on different business opportunities. He has land for agriculture. He also has a shipbuilding practice, or shipbuilding company, so that one of his tasks becomes building a ship for exploration. And that ship, this is a replica that you're seeing in the picture here, is the San Salvador. So Cabrillo, he builds this ship, not himself. He has lots of people working for him, and that would include Spanish workers and also indigenous Guatemalans who were enslaved by Cabrillo. So they enslaved in the Spanish system. So certainly not anything that we would condone today. It's has a difficult side to its history as well. But they would have built the ship. Cabrillo thought that he was in charge of building it, and then someone else was going to sail it. But lo and behold, the person who was supposed to be in command, he dies. And so Cabrillo is asked to then become the captain of the ship, even with not so much navigation experience. And so Cabrillo becomes the captain of the ship. They set off to head north. They actually build the ship on the west coast. So instead of, from Guatemala, the Spanish came in from the east side, but then they would actually walk their supplies across the peninsula, build on the west, so they wouldn't have to go all the way around South America. So they headed up straight from there up the coast of Mexico, and then stopped a few places along the way. They stop here in what becomes San Diego, and they stop here in September of 1542. This is from our film when we recreated a film about this. They come onto shore. One for Cabrillo, his main mission is actually just to explore the area and learn about the area, but also as a side mission is to claim the land for Spain. And so when he comes in, he sees the bay, he claims it as he calls it a very good bay, and he calls it San Miguel. It's a different explorer named Vizcaíno who comes through a little later, and he's the one who then calls it San Diego, the name that we have today. Let's see, do we have any questions on Cabrillo history so far? No?
Nothing.
Okay. So Cabrillo is here. It's really just 6 days. He comes in, they meet the Kumeyaay, peaceful interactions there. He eats a lot of fish, catches some more fish to bring with him, and then they head out again. And then they head up towards up the coastline and end up at the Channel Islands as well, for those who volunteer out there. And Cabrillo's journey, he actually was a miraculous failure in his time because he was trying to actually go all the way across the Pacific Ocean and get to Indonesia area. At that time, those were called the Spice Islands. That's where they'd make all their money. They were trying to make a lot of money by getting pepper and cinnamon and cloves, all those sort of things. So he doesn't get there at all. And it's not until later on that Cabrillo's mission is useful for the Spanish. They use his mission to learn about the currents. So I'm sure a lot of you folks know as well from volunteering in the parks that our current, which way does it go? It goes from the north to the south, right? So you have this really wide current that's flowing north to south. So imagine Cabrillo and his crew and they're heading the other direction. So it was really, really difficult for them. They got all the way to the coast or the modern day border of California, Oregon by following storms and kind of fighting against that current. But they don't, of course, get anywhere near Indonesia by getting up there. And so Cabrillo himself, he actually dies on this journey too. He falls coming out of a small boat, like you see in the picture there in the back. It's called a longboat. So they would use those smaller ships to get off of the big ship to get onto the shore. And so he falls, he breaks his leg, and then later on he gets gangrene. So from that infection, he dies when they're wintering on the Channel Islands. The mission continued though, and the navigator took over for some time until eventually they admit defeat. They aren't getting across the Pacific, and they head back to what was then part of Guatemala. And when you visit Cabrillo National Monument, we have some exhibits up. We have an exhibit room with information about Cabrillo and exploration. And that's one that's coming up, getting ready to be redone shortly as well to modernize it a bit. And another interesting thing, we have a separate organization from us, not Cabrillo National Monument, but the Cabrillo Festival, Inc. They run a festival. It's a Portuguese-American community who runs a Cabrillo festival. So you can imagine in 2015, they were startled to find out that Cabrillo, in fact, was Spanish. But the festival has continued. They do it's a wreath laying every year. And the one thing about this ceremony that's so cool is you have people coming from all over the world. So representatives from Portugal, from Spain, and from Mexico all come together. So it's a nice community event. Let's see, do we have any questions before we move to our next topic?
No questions.
Okay. All right, so our next topic, our coastal sage scrub. So this is what Cabrillo and his men coming from Spain, they would have been writing in their logbooks, everything that they saw. So Cabrillo is writing down all about this native environment, which is something that's brand new for him. So it's the first time that there are written records going back to Europe all about the sage scrub. Of course, the Kumeyaay and the Native Americans further north have all been living and reporting in their own language, in their own ways about this area before that, but that's not going across to the west. So the coastal sage scrub today is really, really important to us because it is a threatened habitat. And I'm sure you can imagine why. You come to any nice cliffside, you come by the beach, what happens there? Of course, humans come and we all build houses because we love the view and we like that it's cool and we get that ocean breeze, especially a day like today when we're all sweating so much. But what that means for this whole area is that it's something like just like 10–15% of the native coastal sage scrub that's still left around the San Diego area. And so that's one of the reasons why this peninsula is so important as a place to protect the native ecosystems. And some of these might be familiar to you all as well. These are some of my favorites. These are the plants when I'm out with the kids on a school program. I let them rub their fingers on it and get the smell of the sage scrub, so they recognize that, and then get the smell of the black sage, and they love that. So in the springtime, you see that nice fluffy sagebrush everywhere. The black sage starts to come out. This time of year, it starts to, it starts to look a little browner around the park for a little bit as we reach the end of summer. Other plants you'd see around, the Mojave yucca, barrel cactus, prickly pear cactus. We have a native plant garden also right near our visitor center, so that's a good place when folks come in, especially from out of the region, that they can look around and learn all about the different local plants. Oh, and this is one of my favorites, the Shaw's agave. You can see we've got some of the Shaw's agave are up near the lighthouse, and then some down by the visitor center as well. And this one's pretty cool because this is a plant that grows pretty much nowhere else in the United States. There's Shaw's agave in Baja, California, and then there's just a small community on the coast here up at Cabrillo. So this is something that our scientists are hard at work to learn more about them, because we can't quite figure out how they're able to pollinate themselves. Down in Baja, it's usually 2 different types of bats that will go in and out and pollinate the plants. But up here, those type of bats don't come to Cabrillo National Monument. So we're trying to figure out, okay, so what are they doing? How are they pollinating? We know that they can clone themselves, like when you see the big stalk here down by the base, you can't see in this picture because of the brush, but there's a rosette, so like the part that goes around the agave, and it will clone itself, so you'll see little ones all around that. But that's the exact same DNA. So we want to know if they're able to actually reproduce through pollination. And so what we did, the scientists set up Anabat, which is a thing that you leave overnight and it will record any activity. Then a bat expert listened to it. So if you can imagine, he can tell the difference between all the different bat calls. And he heard 11 different types of bats. So these bats, as far as we know, they don't live out here. There's no environment for them, but they're coming from the city, probably back from our attics and things, coming out here for their nighttime buffet, out to the Shaw's agave and then back. But still, those aren't the bats that are known to pollinate these. So we don't know exactly. But what we can tell is that they still seem to be doing fairly well and seem fairly healthy, still flowering and blooming. The way you see them now in these photos, they bloom like that just one time in their whole life. They live somewhere between, depends on the conditions, but like 30 to 40 years usually, and just that one big bloom, and that's it. That's why it's so important to understand how they pollinate to help to protect them. Oh, and then of course, all our little animals around. We've got the scrub jay up top, the little rabbits. I'm sure you guys have all those as well. And the ground squirrels. We have a few special ground squirrels who like to take visitors' trash, of course, around the decks. It's a lot of fun for the kids, though, to see those guys. More Cabrillo animals. We've got the red-tailed hawk that sits on top there, that's sitting on top of the Cabrillo statue. Then we have all of these different kinds of snakes. We've got our rattlesnakes, and then on the bottom right is an orange-throated whiptail lizard. More often, though, you'll see just the western fence lizards all around the patios. And usually with the snakes we don't see too much, but it was very interesting during all the COVID closures when the park was closed fully for almost 2 months, I guess 2 months. All the native sage scrub and underbrush like spilled out everywhere over to the sidewalks. It was a lot of rain that time. And then that's when we saw way more snakes. They took back the park and they were out and about a lot more often. All right. So our next big theme, and one of my favorite aspects of the history at the park, is the old Point Loma Lighthouse. It was an aid to navigation operating 1855 to 1891. When it was first built, if you remember, I said that this became the United States in 1850. So it was really pretty right after it became part of the United States that the Lighthouse Board decides that they need to put lighthouses up the coast of California. Reason being, what's happening up in Northern California, inland. People are going up there trying to dig up their fortunes, right? They're trying to get all the gold. And so with that, there's way more ships coming up and down the coastline. And so that's the reason that the old Point Loma Lighthouse is built. And it was built in its location because it was supposed to do two things with one building, and that was to guide ships into the harbor itself, and then to guide ships around the point. So they thought, oh, we're gonna save all this money by putting only one building on the top. What they didn't think about was a few things. First of all, it was really, really hard to get supplies on that high bluff. It's not like you could just bring a boat up and drop the supplies. You had to bring the boat and then cart everything up the hill. Other big problem is something that rolls in, especially at nighttime along the coastline. Feels really nice on a hot day, but all that fog, all that marine layer, it's not helping anyone navigate. So they had this beautiful lens, and then in the end, a lot of times at nighttime, no one could see it. Oh, here's an old photo we have of one of the keepers named Robert Israel, who he and his family were at the lighthouse for the longest period of time. And he's standing there over the cliffside, and I just imagine him looking out to sea, seeing if any ships were coming in. This one, of course, is taken for the photograph, but oftentimes he might have been out there on the cliff, so imagine it's dark, there's fog is rolling in, he's trying to see if there's any ships down there. And what he often did when he had to, there was no foghorn yet, so he created his own, just with his shotgun that he would fire off just for the sound, so that the ships could hear something and know that there was land there and they needed to avoid that area. That was his makeshift for a little while until they get a different lighthouse. So the lighthouse itself, regular times, you can go inside the lighthouse and see the 4 rooms inside. And then we have special days of the year where you can go up to the top and see the Fresnel lens, that really fancy French lens on the top, and see the view from the deck all around. When you first come in, you see on the lower floor, there's a kitchen and there's a parlor. The kitchen and the parlor and all the interior is restored to the year 1887. And the reason that we picked that date is because the outside, I'll go back one slide a second. If you see how the outside of the lighthouse is white, it's all whitewashed. And that was done in 1887 because before that it was just sandstone, and the sandstone was starting to fall down. And so they had to whitewash it. And since, of course, today, to preserve it, we have to keep it nice and whitewashed, we interpret the interior from the same year, it's 1887. So we've got the kitchen parlor downstairs, and then this is the best photo everyone takes when they come and visit. You can go on the spiral staircase up to the 2nd floor. There's 2 bedrooms. There's the keeper's bedroom and then the children's bedroom as well. And then this is the top here. We have the lantern, the lens deck. And this, see this outer part, this is the Fresnel lens that was made in France. It was the top technology at the time, and it was best able to project the light that would be inside. Now there's no light in here, but there would be a light in here, a little lantern, and the lens was projecting that all the way out to sea. And there you can see, this is an old photo, 1897, and you see the lighthouse just up top here. So you can imagine if there is fog hanging on this cliff line, you're not seeing it at all. Do we have any questions about the old Point Loma Lighthouse?
No questions about the lighthouse, but we do have a couple of questions about Cabrillo. So if you want to answer those at the end, or I'm not sure how you want to do that.
Yeah, let's do them at the end. We can always go back to the. Okay, so here we are at the new Point Loma Lighthouse, new being 1891, and that is still in operation. So eventually, there's such a problem with that fog rolling in, you can't see the light, and so they build one lighthouse down by the coastline to guide ships around the harbor, and that one that is no longer there, but it would be on the other side of this cliffside to guide them in the harbor itself. So they would have ended up having to build the 2 lighthouses anyways, even though they tried to save that money. And then down below, you can see it's just like a little spot of paradise down here. Visitors are always like, oh, what's that? Like, is that an Airbnb? Can I go stay down there? I wish, but no, it's part of the Coast Guard. So the lighthouse is still in operation. It's all automated. So the folks who live down there are usually the higher ranking members of the Coast Guard and their families. They'll be assigned down there for 2 years, get that perfect ocean breeze, perfect ocean view for the time that they're down below. And this is also very close to our tide pools as well. So the tidal area is actually all in front of this in the water there. And the part that's accessible to visitors is off to the left of the photo.
Julianne?
Yeah.
Real quick, can you tell us how far out, I forget, but how far out does the 3rd order project?
I think it's something like if it's a clear day, and it depends on the height too. I think ours is something like 25 miles or so.
Okay.
But I'd have to go and double check that.
And
Make sure
is
that was
the
correct.
new one a 3rd order also, or is that a 1st order?
The new one, well, yeah, so the new one, when they first installed it, it was a 1st order. It's a larger one, and we have that actually up in we have a little museum room next to the lighthouse, so you can go and see it. Nowadays, of course, they don't use any of those. They just, like, the light is like super tiny, but really bright. But yeah, originally it would have been 1st order down below.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Well, next up is maybe the visitor's favorite place to visit, the Rocky Intertidal Zone. It's both part of a national park, and then the water all around there is part of a state marine protected area. So it has double levels of protection. It is one of the best preserved tidal areas in all of Southern California. So it's really important to preserve this area to help preserve the species that live in it, of course. So here you can see the difference. You've got the super, we've got the super high tide when the water's up crashing against the sandstone cliffs. And then we've got our low tide where the tide is all the way out. And this is the ideal time to come and visit the tide pools, because you can see the people down there. They're walking really far out. And that's when you see all the really cool stuff. Like you could even see an octopus or a sea hare, it's like a giant sea slug. And that's when we'll run field trips as well and bring kids down to the tide pools. We also, in our tidal area, we have a research program to help understand what's going on in the tide pools. We actually have it divided off into 3 separate zones. So visitors can see zone 1 and zone 2, but zone 3 is only for research. And so there we're able to compare and contrast how species are doing where people can go and how they're doing in places where humans cannot go. So here you see, this is one of the best viewpoints. I've gone out to help with recording the data, and you end up in the tide pools right underneath that lighthouse. And this is where the researchers are in this image. And one of the things that the research focuses on is this species here, the owl limpet. And that's because they're really important indicator species. In general, so the owl limpets, it looks kind of like it's just a shell, but there's a really strong muscle underneath holding onto the rock. They generally stay in one area and they'll graze on a rock there, eat off all the algae and everything, and that's their home base. So because they generally stay in one place, and also because they start their life as male, and then when they get big enough, they become female, and that's when they're able to reproduce. So because of that, those 2 things, that's why it's a good indicator to see how healthy the tide pools are. If they're not healthy, you're not going to see so many of those larger owl limpets. If it's an area where they're measuring them and they're all super tiny, it's probably not the healthiest area. The area where they're able to get really big and establish their territory, then that's probably a healthier area. Yeah, and here you can see them along the rocky cliffside. as they walk along, they make, or move along, they make distinct marks on the rock. And that's as they're grazing, as you see here on the cliff. It's pretty fun trying to find them. Sometimes when you're out there on the cliff or the research, you have to get upside down and look underneath the rocks and things because you can't always see right where they're hiding. Okay. See, any other questions?
Have a question about the lighthouse, but we can come back to that also since we're moving on.
Yeah, we can come at the end. We're getting towards the end of the presentation.
Okay.
So one of the more recent themes that's been added to the park to interpret is military history. Maybe the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. That's when we opened up the little radio tower room where folks can go in and see exhibits, and then also restored the bunker where people can go. We have a bunch of volunteers who they dress in living history from World War II period, and they invite folks down to see, look out from the views and see the 2-level bunker. So the peninsula was an important defensive point in both World War I and World War II. And I'd say most of the structures we have that you can still see are from World War II era. So there's that radio station I mentioned. The base end station is the bunker. Also, if you take the Bayside Trail, along the way, there's wayside exhibits with panels with information about the searchlight, shelter, and gun emplacement. So that would be along the coastline facing the harbor. They have these gigantic spotlights so that during World War II, if they saw anything in the water that they didn't recognize, they could pull out this huge searchlight on this track and point the light at it so they could see what it was, if it was a ship that belonged to them or if not, and then they had their guns nearby. And so of course during World War II, San Diego was a big military area, of course still is, and they were worried after the attack on Pearl Harbor that San Diego might be next. And that's why there is so much activity here and so much building along this coastline. So here's that military history exhibit that's in the little radio room. And then just up the hill from there, there's the little the bunker. So you see it on the bottom photo there on the right, that's what it looks like to get into it. There's steps going down to the ground. And then if you walked around the back, it looks like more of the photo on the top on the left. It's the extent of the bunker. And down below, here's you can see that searchlight, where the searchlight would get wheeled out of as well, and a little command station down there as well. So some of the men who were out on the point, they were assigned to night duty, and they had to stay up all night and be watching out over the harbor. Okay. So now we've come to our final theme, and that's the Pacific gray whale migration. Yeah, I guess from Channel Islands too, and maybe from Santa Monica. Can you see the gray whales go by?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see them too.
You have to be, there's some certain locations where you have a better chance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it is here too. They, on their migration down the coast, they're closer in. So you have to be looking for them. But if you are looking, we have since we're all the way out on the peninsula, it's a pretty good vantage point. And you can look out over the ocean and look for the blow of the water going up into the air. This is our whale watch trail area. So some exhibits, information about the kelp forest and about the whales. And we have binoculars that we give out, and folks can go out and sit out there, use their binoculars and take a look. You can see them with just your eyes too. They're not too far off the coastline. And the big trick that I use, look where the whale watch boats are and then look around that area. So you might see something. So these are different views that folks in the past have seen from Cabrillo, been able to record. You can see the those gray whales on their way down. And then when they're on their way back up the coastline, they're farther offshore, and so you can't really see much from our area. And here are just a few more views. We've been staying open till sunset recently, so it's been really extra beautiful getting the views in. Sandstone cliffs, views over the harbor and the city. Got a little bit of everything here. All right. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. Let's go back and answer some of the other questions too.
Yeah, so some people were saying that they've seen the whales. Someone saw them in Malibu. Another person said Point Doom and Point Magoo. So here are some of the questions that came up. I'll take the last one. Oh, and Carpinteria also. So I'll start with the most recent one and work my way back. What is the entrance fee?
Oh, entrance fee to get into Cabrillo is $20, and that's for 7 days for the car. And then we have an annual pass too for just our park. That's $35. That's so San Diego local folks will get that one.
Cool. That's a pretty good deal for a year.
Yeah, that's the best deal.
So there was a question about the searchlight. And what was the searchlight? What is the searchlight?
Yeah, it's that giant, let's see, that picture I showed, maybe that helped clear it up too. I don't know if I can, oh, there we go. They would wheel out just like a gigantic light. Here it is on the bottom left here, the red. And it would be, see the building, the photo above it, it would just be in here. It's on a track. You can kind of see coming out of the building. It's like almost like a train track, and they could wheel it out on the track and point it down at the ocean to try to see any ships, or especially they were worried about Japanese submarines. So if they saw any submarines, they could point it there if it was they didn't know of a ship coming in at that time.
There was a question about how the lens was driven. Was that a weight system, or how did that work?
It was, and how it was, what was the question?
How was the light, what mechanism was used in the lighthouse? Was it a weight mechanism?
Oh, right, like if it was a rotating lens?
Yeah.
Well, the lighthouse up top, that's part of Cabrillo, that one was a fixed lens. So it was a third order lens, just one steady beam. So it didn't have any weight mechanism or anything. But down below at the new lighthouse from 1891, that one was a rotating lens. And that had some kind of, it was a little later time then too, so it had some kind of mechanism that would have it turn around. We tried to repair that and restore it and have it in our, we have it in our little exhibit room. So it's set up so that it should be able to rotate and show you how it would rotate, but we've never gotten it to work. They spent money trying to get that mechanism working, and it doesn't work. But it did used to rotate.
Okay. Then the questions we had about Cabrillo, could you go over again why everybody thought Cabrillo was Portuguese?
Oh yeah, so they thought that Cabrillo was thought to be Portuguese because of a mistake made by a historian in the 1600s. So this is something that I think is so interesting, that we think we know the history, but we're always learning new facts. And so what we thought we knew about the past can change. And that's what happened in this case. It was a historian who wrote down in his book, he's writing Juan Rodrigues Cabrillo, Portuguese, continues on. So he's labeled this man as Portuguese, but he talks about a different explorer later on in this same document who actually was Portuguese and was mislabeled. So really the historian just kind of flipped the title, the ethnicity of each man. And so then for what, that was 1600, so the next 300 years, everyone thought that he was Portuguese. And then the historian who found out that he was in fact born in Spain, she specializes in colonial Spain, and she was reading through all these old court documents. And Cabrillo, he was brought into court and questioned about some gold that went missing on a trip. And so in that log where he's talking about that, they ask him his name, they ask him where he's born. And that's how the mystery gets solved.
Wow, that's pretty cool. The festival that happens there, when does that typically happen?
It happens every year at the end of September. Cabrillo landed September 28th, 1542. So usually there's that wreath laying ceremony. I showed the photo, will be on the date. And then whatever the weekend is, the Portuguese community throws that Cabrillo festival. And they don't actually do it out here at the park anymore. They do it down where he actually landed. So technically where Cabrillo landed is not in the boundaries of Cabrillo National Monument, but in the naval station. It's called Ballast Point. It's a little point that juts out that you can see very clearly from the park. And so it's one day a year that average citizens can get into the military base and go to see the Cabrillo Festival. And for them as well, the Cabrillo Festival, it's really important to them to be celebrating all the different cultures. So they have representatives, so there are a lot of Portuguese and Spanish, and then invite Kumeyaay Native Americans come as well.
Okay. Just a few more questions came in. Are the marine resources on the Bayside, a point of focus?
Are they on the Bayside? Is that the question?
Ralph, can you?
Yeah, sorry, I was doing some other things related to this, but doing some other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious on the bay side of the point. It seems as though the marine focus that you all are engaged in, whether it's professionally or for visitors, is all on the west side of the point. And
Yes.
and so the other side of the point, it's restricted because of navigation, or because it immediately falls to great depth, or are you actually doing work over there as well?
No. So one of the reasons it's on the west side is that's where all the tidal pools are. And so the focus on the park is on the tidal zone. The other side, it's really not easy. It's not really accessible either. It's down the sandstone cliff, so you can't get to the water area. It's also very close there to the naval base station. And there's also the airfield for the Navy, and that's the entrance to the harbor. So that's an area that we have our Bayside Trail that goes down to that area. We have a lot of studies on land having to do with the native animals on land, but not in the water there. It's really not even in the jurisdiction of our park. Is the other thing. It's out of our boundary.
Okay. So this is kind of following up a little bit. Is the ecological area separate from the monument, and how is it used?
Yeah, maybe it's on the map. You can see there's like the ecological zone, and then you hit Cabrillo. Well, I wouldn't say it's separate. There's just land. It's more like it's a partnership. So Cabrillo National Monument manages part of the land, but then we also partner with the Navy and their ecologists to work on projects on the Navy Peninsula as well. So they have ecological reserve areas, and together, like for example, our scientists, I think monthly they'll go out and they do the herpofauna trap. So it's like you have the hole in the ground, the bucket, and you count whatever lizards and snakes and things come in. So they work together on those sort of projects. And so that extends even outside of our technical boundary.
Okay. And can you go back to where you were showing images of the limpets?
Yeah.
Somebody was asking if you could highlight the footprints left by the limpets.
Oh yeah, so here's the up close one, and then the one where they kind of like go across the
So
rock.
those wavy marks where it's green and brown, is that the footprint?
Yeah, I guess I thought looking at it, I didn't actually take this photo, so I think it's supposed to be in this area, but I would agree that it's not super clear to me.
Okay. All right. And Aaron, are you still with us? If you are, you're on mute. Hey, Lay, do you know if Aaron's with us?
I saw that he was, and then I'm looking right now. I don't think he's with us anymore.
Okay, all right. Because there was a question about Cabrillo's visit here. And if
Oh,
you
to Santa Monica or Channel
Yeah.
Islands?
to this, yeah, because you mentioned Santa Monica, or you mentioned Channel Islands,
Mm-hmm.
and oh, Aaron left the Zoom to answer a call. I personally don't know the answer to that, Ralph. Does Reza, do you know?
No, I don't know much about him except for the fact that when he did come up through the coast, he did write in his journals that he did notice that the ops were different sizes. And that's when I was studying the op and the demonstration, that it didn't mean that the biggest op wasn't for just the antop or the chief. It was meant for multiple families, and that Cabrillo note that there were anywhere between the height of 4 feet and up to 20 feet or 18 feet at high, depending on how big of the family was. But that's the only thing I've learned from Cabrillo in this area.
Okay, cool. Cool. Well, are there any other questions for Julieanne?
My question is not for Julieanne. Did you post the recording of last Thursday's LA Historic Park?
No, we couldn't post the El Pueblo or the American Tropical about the mural because she shared some proprietary photos with us. And
Okay.
yeah, so unfortunately, but she did say that she was willing to come back and do another talk for us in the future. So,
Thank you.
yep. Julieanne, I will tell you that when you were talking about the lighthouse and how the fog layer came in, it took me right back to Point Bonita, which is up at Golden Gate. And they first built it up on the cliffs. That's where they first built the lighthouse, and it was 1854. And then they moved it down below because of the same thing. They moved it to
same
a
problem.
location, same problem.
Yeah.
So they actually had the first foghorn system, which was a cannon that they would
Yeah.
fly.
Yeah, similar then.
Yeah, very similar. Here's a couple of other things. You mentioned that the owl limpets established territories. I can't imagine that they would or could but do they defend their algae territory with other limpets?
Well, they are territorial. They have their own area where they graze, and you'd have to ask one of the marine biologists to get more into detail about that. But they do defend their little areas, as when they're the larger size.
Right? Yeah, that's hard for me to imagine how they battle it out in slow motion or but all right, any other questions? We're getting some thank yous for you. Great presentation. Some more thank yous. Some people now are really excited to go visit. So
Yeah, I hope we see some of you down here. You'll have definitely let us know at our entrance booth or at the visitor desk and introduce yourself.
yeah.
Hey, Julianne, it's Scott. One thing you might want to mention is when the good low tides are.
Oh, good low tides. If you're coming out for a tide pool experience, it is important to check the tide schedule. And generally, the better tides are in the winter time, fall to winter. And what you really want to take a look for is a 0.7 or below. It's 0.7 feet or below. If there's a negative tide, that's really good. And with that, check our website, check the San Diego tide calendar, and always you can call us as well if you're planning a trip and you want a little advice on where to come with the tides.
Great, thank you so much, Julieanne. It's been a while, like Riza was saying earlier, it's been a while since I've been there, but I've learned more from having you on, because when I was there, I didn't get to interact with any of the rangers or the volunteers at that time. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to my next visit. Somebody did ask if August or September is a good time to come.
In general or for tides?
In
general.
I don't know. I think in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the same as any of the coastal parks, that it's a little busier in August. And it always confuses me coming from the East Coast that we're still so hot in September. We get our hottest weather. So, but it tends to slow down a bit. And then for tides, I think maybe we get a few low tides in October, and then it really picks up more like November, December.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. And you answered their question. I said, great, thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us and sharing about Cabrillo. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
And we'll see you on Thursday.
All right, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
again, Julieanne.